Well, first of all, thank you, Jay, for that introduction. And I have to tell you that I couldn't agree with you more. Not so much about Dawn and I being good people, because that goes without saying, but how much Dawn and I enjoy working with each other. And we've known each other for many years. Dawn is my boss, as a matter of fact, and she does a great job. And I'm so blessed to be a part of the City of Minneapolis. So I'm going to kick us off here first. And the first thing I'm going to do is show you the slide. You go, well, who cares about the slide? I said to Dawn, you know what? The building that you see straight ahead isn't done yet. We have a brand new building in downtown Minneapolis, the Public Service Building. And Dawn said she chose that for the crosswalk, to emphasize the fact that when we're doing this kind of work, it's about meeting together. It's about doing crosswalks. It's about both parties, both groups of people moving together to get where we need to go, et cetera, et cetera. And so I really like this picture. And we actually work in the building that you see on the left there, which is City Hall, a wonderful building. I tell my grandchildren that I work in a castle, and I do. So what are we going to do today? You can read the program objectives there, and these are pretty much what you had seen in the descriptor of the program. And so we're going to do a lot of discussion, not just talking about what we did. We're going to do a little introduction here and talk about why we came up with the Agile Manager program. We're going to talk a little bit about the core frontline leader duties, as well as power skills that are necessary to be culturally agile and also to lead in a culturally agile way. So those two things you will be weighing in on. Then we will talk about the approach that we had to Agile Manager. So the first thing here is a little introduction, and we're going to start out with a couple of polls. So the first one, Jay is going to put up. Do I need to stop sharing, Jay? I guess I don't need to. So how much experience do you have designing leadership programs? Okay, some, none, okay. How many folks do we have here today? Well, it says right there, 27. There we go. Okay, we're getting there. Come on, folks. Let us know. So it looks like we have a mixture of a little over half of you folks with some experience, about 40% of you with no experience, and then just a couple with extensive. We really wanted to know that because we know that this is called the Young Learning Leaders Forum. And so we weren't really sure how much folks have had on that. So that's good to know. Let's go with the next question, because we are really dealing with two things here. So thank you for that. Luke is our technical guru today. How much experience do you have developing DEI-related initiatives, skills, and behaviors? Okay. Okay, so it looks like
one person with a lot of experience in both. Perhaps that's the same person.
Maybe it is. Maybe it is. And here we have a little bit more 50-50. So there's more people in the room who have not had the experience with this particular topic, but there's some experience there. And I think the reason why this is important, at least for me, is this. As a learning professional, I am asked to do a lot of training and development. And the first thing I want to know is, well, obviously, we're going to talk a little bit about objectives and stuff like that. But how much will I be the subject matter expert versus how much will I reach out to subject matter experts? How much will I develop the content all by myself versus ask others to give me content and then I apply learning principles to that content? Now, in this case, I have experience in both, but I don't like to call myself an expert in DEI. And this is one of the reasons you'll see that we reached out to some DEI experts to get some content that would have even more depth than what I might be able to have in my toolkit as is. So it looks like we're a little 50-50 on both of these, and that's cool. Thank you so much, Luke, for sharing that. I appreciate it. Thank you for weighing in, everybody. Okay. You know, the first thing that we're going to talk about now, I should say, the next thing we're going to talk about is why the Agile Manager program. So Dawn, why don't you kick us off with why did we do this to begin with, for heaven's sake?
The City of Minneapolis has long worked on becoming more inclusive, cultivating a workplace culture that helps people feel like they belong, that welcomes people from all sorts of diverse backgrounds. The Agile Manager was not the first program, but it received special emphasis after the May 2020 murder of George Floyd. And we want to acknowledge that the history has long had patterns of behavior that help sustain and even promulgate the huge disparities that the population, the public experiences in the city today. The city didn't directly perpetrate some of these patterns or systems, but as many back in the day said, well, that's just the way we did things, and didn't question, didn't ask, didn't try to interrupt. And so acknowledging that means that we've got a special obligation to continue to try to overcome racism. And we not only do that with our public, but we need to do it within our walls, within that castle that Vince talked about, showing up to work every day. And like most employers, the city does focus on its customers first and foremost, its public. And so there's been lots of initiatives to overcome racism. Racism was declared as a public health emergency a couple of summers ago. We have the Strategic Racial Equity Action Plan that's been put into place. But there's not been a lot of concerted efforts to look at our workplace culture and to make that culture an anti-racist culture, really until the George Floyd murder accelerated that. So that was one why. There were a few other whys as well. It was needed. We had an older frontline leadership development program that had become more of a series of standalone classes. It wasn't a sense of it kind of hanging together. It needed to be updated. The original one needed to be retired, and then an updated version needed to be created. And we've focused again on many, many initiatives and wanted our leadership development program to reflect our high value around what was termed and continues to be termed cultural agility. And we'll define that here in just a few minutes. But essentially, it's the cross-cultural skill set, the skill set that enables people to interact with all sorts of people successfully, to be able to meet those folks where they prefer to be met. And so we'll continue to define cultural agility, but we really wanted this program to reflect it. Now, we'd had previous programs in place. We had a flagship leadership development program, really for the top and all the way through the front line of the leadership in the organization. It was called Leadership U. You might remember the days of the corporate university. This reflected that title, Leadership U, and it consisted of 6 full-day seminars. And half of one of those 6 days was devoted to cultural agility. Half of 6. And that was the only place where cultural agility was talked about, the skills were practiced, and that was where it sat. There wasn't another mention of it with the other 5.5 days. We wanted to do some things differently. And so we created the Agile Manager. Am I advancing? There we go. Thank you. And as had been done previously, we didn't want to do the same old thing where you look at, okay, we're going to do these competencies and we're going to cover them in these 5 sessions and we'll devote a half day to that one at the bottom. We really wanted it to come, I'm sorry, I'm unable to animate my own slide. We wanted it to be threaded throughout all of the competencies and skills that frontline leaders are expected to do. We wanted to talk about cultural agility with every single one of those, rather than tagging it on at the end or in the middle or just a half of a day. It was going to be coming up every single topic, every single time. So here's what we were driving toward. Here was our outcome. We wanted to create a multi-course series. We wanted to build the skills and the ability to perform all of the expectations of a frontline leader, meaning folks who are closest to the folks who are doing the work of the city. And so we're talking supervisors, managers. We've certainly had directors come through, even a department head or two, but that is the target, the focus audience. And even the term frontline leader was new language for the city, but we wanted to be sure we were being inclusive of all of those titles rather than just calling it, this is for managers only. Agile Manager was a slight exception to that rule because of the alliteration of Agile and Manager. We just enjoyed that, but we make it very clear it is for all frontline leaders. And the city had already established a frontline leadership skill set expectation that actually all employees, so all of us are small L leaders, right? All employees are evaluated on. And so we wanted to reflect that management skill set with that thread of cultural agility running all the way through. So that's what we were wanting to create.
Mm-hmm. And, Dawn, I would say a couple things is, first of all, with the Leadership U program coming into the city, after that program had been launched, and I think I came in when it was on its last iteration, I was really impressed with how many times I heard leaders throughout the organization allude to Leadership U. And they would say, oh, yeah, we covered that in Leadership U, or, oh, I learned something about that in Leadership U just in the course of my doing consulting with them. To me, that's always a sign that it's making an impression. And I'm starting to hear the same things as well about Agile Manager. The second thing is it is a frontline leadership course. This said, we have been getting people at the managerial and even the director level as well being a part of this. The fact is, as you'll see later, these are some skills that we can't always just assume even our senior leaders have, because some of them don't. And so we have been getting a wide range of people coming to this class. So it's been fabulous. Before I move on to the next session, any comments or any questions that folks have before we move on to the next section? Either raise your hand or put something in the chat. Okay, cool. Let's move on. Okay, so what we're going to do now is talk about what those core frontline duties are. And the way we're going to do this is I'm going to stop sharing, and then Luke is going to put a whiteboard up, and it is what topics do you include in a frontline leadership series? What tasks do those folks have to do and be competent at? So let's see what some of your thoughts are on that.
So there are Post-its on the left that you can copy and paste and put in the big teal area, or there is also a control panel on the left of your screen where you can create shapes, draw, add text, or also add a new sticky note. So if you if you want to go the easy route, you can grab a sticky note and control C and paste, or I see we can also just grab the sticky notes. I will add a few more back up. And then with the control panel, the top icon for the arrow, if you have that turned to hand, you will be able to pan around. And if it's turned to the arrow, anything you click on, you will grab and move around.
Thank you. It's a little hard for me to see some of these things. So I'm going to see if I can bring this up a little closer and see what we've got here. I know what I can do. I can make it a little bigger, fit to screen. 200%. Okay, let's see what we've got here. And I hope that I don't miss some of them. So what we've got is You know what? I'm having a little problem seeing these. Hold on. Discovery on what leading means. Absolutely. And really starting out with that and helping make sure that we are on the same page with what are we really talking about? What do leaders need to do? What does being a leader mean? Absolutely. Types of leading and leadership. Absolutely. The types of leading and leadership. And this is something that we go into an Agile Manager is there's you need to be flexible with your leadership, not only with each individual who is different, but also in what you are trying to accomplish and what kind of task or motivation you're trying to achieve. So how do you lead differently? How to respond to equity concerns. Okay, very good. Absolutely. How to make decisions in a timely manner. Love that one. Love that one. Nothing more frustrating than a leader who just isn't making decisions. Recognize the ways identity shows up in relationships and interactions. And I want you to hold on to that thought as well as, I want you to hold on to that thought because in a little bit, we're going to be talking more specifically about being an Agile manager culturally. And so self-awareness, coaching, yes, absolutely. Coaching is one of them. Developing others, absolutely. Absolutely. Let's see here. Let's see if I can get some more of this stuff showing up. Hold on here. What have we got here? Boy, I'm having a hard time reading. Oh, here we go. All right. Empathy, interesting. How to listen, addressing unconscious biases. Oh, yes, that is a big one we're going to be talking about in a bit. And again, keep that one in mind as you do your breakout sessions. Words and actions, aligning your words and your actions. Wonderful. Okay, let's see what we've got here. See if I've got a self-awareness. We said developing, understanding who you are serving. Interesting. Now, what's interesting with that one, and if somebody wants to chime in, they can. Are we talking about serving in terms of that idea of servant leadership that we as a leader are serving our employees, or are we talking about serving from a customer perspective? If somebody, anybody, even if you did not write that one, would like to chime in, that would be great. Who are you serving? Wonder what more that means. Strength awareness. Interesting, being aware of your strengths. Absolutely. Boy, when I'm seeing some of these, Don, I'm thinking of an Agile Manager Part 2 for people who have graduated from Agile Manager, where maybe we could do something with the strength finders, in something really, understanding who you are, like even more around that self-discovery might be a great Part 2. What am I missing? Can you see any up there that I might have missed?
Looks like we were talking about servant leadership with one's employees, Vince.
Yeah, absolutely. And
That came out in the notes.
say more.
That was in the notes. That was in the chat.
I see it. Thank you. And thank you for bringing that up. When I started formal leadership roles many decades ago, not formal leadership roles, leadership development roles decades ago, it was a pretty big thing. It was pretty new. And I'm telling you, I have re-looked at some of that documentation, some of that content, and it's as applicable today as it ever was, is to think of yourself as really enabling others to succeed and not so much as being the one who is in control. Words and actions, we already mentioned that one. Okay. Any Dawn, or maybe even Luke, Jay, if you see any that I have not noted, or are we pretty good?
I think we're good.
Think we're good. Very good. It's funny because you can see people's cursors hovering. I always say hovering, and then Don corrects me and says hovering. Wonderful. Okay. All right. And Luke sends apologies to those who were not able to view the whiteboard. And especially if you're on a phone or a small mobile device, sometimes these things don't work. Okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to share my PowerPoint again. Wonderful. And share. Here we are. Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for that. It's interesting, as you'll see a little bit later, we do have some of those topics on our docket that we train on a regular basis with Agile Manager, but some we do not. And so I think that that's really interesting. And I might, I'm just really thinking of a part 2 for, I don't know, just really inspired by some of the things that are on this slide. So thank you so much. So one of the things that we did is we looked at what is expected of leaders. And one of you noted that was one of the first stickies that went on is what is expected of leaders. And so what this had already been identified prior to the leadership development Agile Manager. People need to coach. You mentioned that. They need to direct work. They need to delegate. Okay, one of the things we have found, and you may as well, is when you have new leaders, a lot of times they are promoted from within. They are promoted from an individual contributor role. This happens all the time. We get comments and scenarios of this all the time. What they're not used to is delegating and directing and having other people do that work. So they end up with this big weight on their shoulders because they're still doing a lot of the stuff or digging in there when there's a problem and just pulling it out and doing it instead of directing the work and coaching other people to do it. This is a big common theme. Creating a safe work culture. And so when we talk about safe work culture, we are talking not only about physical, but also emotional safety there. And people want to go to a place where they feel safe. Managing performance, of course, that's a big one, especially for newer leaders who aren't used to being the one to either have to let folks know that they're not doing a good job or actually setting those work expectations and helping to monitor those and encourage the person to monitor their own. And of course, we expect people to be a role model. We want them to be behaving the way that they would like others people behave. So we start out with this actually. And we start out in saying, you're a leader at the city. What does that mean? And what is expected of you? So now we're going to talk about the power skills. What are the skills that help people be culturally agile? So what we're going to do is we're going to have you go into small groups of 5 and come up with at least 3 power skills, at least 3 or more. Front leaders need to display to show cultural awareness, sensitivity, and agility. You came up with a couple of them earlier. I want you to come up with more because you're going to say, what are the things we're going to weave in to all of those skills and that you just managed? So, Lika, can you describe how this is going to happen? Yes, Don.
I would just like to clarify that power skills is sometimes referred to as soft skills. There is also the thought that the soft skills are the hardest ones of all. And so we have elected to call them power skills rather than soft skills. But I thought that might help people understand what we're getting at. Thank you.
Thank you for clarifying that, because we've been using that. We had a consultant who came to who was doing some work with us this year, and he used that word power skills. And I thought, I love it. These aren't soft. None of these things are soft. These are the things that give us all power, empower everyone. So what are those skills that are going to help us display cultural awareness, sensitivity, agility? So, Luke, how's this going to work?
So in a moment, everybody will be brought into their rooms. I'm just doing a little recreating to make sure we have balanced rooms. So there will actually be 4 per room with the numbers we have, and then Vince and Don and Jay will be able to join any room they'd like to kind of jump in and join in on the chats. So in a moment, you'll be sent to your rooms.
And your discussion leader, because we're going to ask you to report out, is the person with the birthday closest to today. Closest to today.
Right, here we go.
Very good. Thank you so much, Luke.
Vince, if you're talking, we cannot hear you.
You can't hear me? Well, we can't have that.
Not dropping our names.
There we go. I think I'm back. Well, we had a little time to do introductions as well, and that was just absolutely fascinating. What a small world it is. Always such a small world. So let's talk about what you came up with. One thing I didn't ask you to do is take a look at your room number. And I always forget to ask that. So I'm going to ask if you remember if you were in group number 1. Wait a second. Am I debriefing this, or are you done? Let's see here.
I believe that's you, Vince.
Okay, very good. All right. Okay, so group number 1, give us one. Oh, wait, first of all, can I ask Luke, how many groups did we have?
We had 5 groups.
Okay,
and
right. So we're going to do a little bit of round robin here. So I'm going to ask for one idea from each group, and then we will come back for another idea. So group number 1, give us one of your ideas with regard to competency for cultural agility, etc.
And group number 1 was Anu, Jill, Kara, and Molly.
All right, so my birthday is closest to today. So I would say our first one is developing others.
Okay. Developing others. Say a little bit more about that as it relates to
in that we talked about being able to build trust and how that also kind of facilitates things like being able to delegate and manage time and all of those really important things for all of us.
Oh, wonderful. And when is your birthday, Molly, if you care to share?
March 1.
March 1, happy birthday, belated, but happy birthday.
Thank you.
Wonderful. Developing others, building the trust that helps you to do that. And who was in group 2, Luke?
I am adding that to chat, but that was Brittany, Danica, Jordan, and Miranda.
Wonderful. Thank you. So which one of you is going to report out a power skill for cultural agility?
I have been nominated. So one of the big things we talked about in our group was active listening and really getting to know the people that you're leading, both personally and professionally. One of the other things that we talked about as we were wrapping up our discussion, 3 out of the 4 of us were white folks. And so we talked about making sure that we are not taking up too much space in conversations around diversity and providing opportunities for marginalized or underrepresented groups to tell their own stories and how we can support that and promote that with using our privilege.
Wonderful, Brittany. Thank you for that. You know, I was working with an internal group recently. I am working with an internal group. And one of the things that they brought up is when you're in a meeting, especially when you're making decisions and discussing important issues, look around the room and see, are we all appearing the same here? Do we need to hear another voice? And I really loved that because I was in a couple of meetings since then, and I was looking around and very pleased to say, I'm hearing from some of our BIPOC folks. But a lot of times we're in meetings where we're just hearing kind of one viewpoint, one voice. So I really like that. Thank you. And in group 3?
That is me, Jen Kobza.
Hi,
And
Jen.
hi.
And Jen, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
First of all, Jen, when is your birthday?
Okay, well, October 10th, we had all fall birthdays. What the heck?
Wow. And
I
Brittany went, so I'm not going to wish you a happy birthday. But Brittany, when is your birthday?
End of May.
End of May. So you've got, it's still coming. It's still
It
coming. Okay,
is.
Jen, go ahead.
Oh my gosh. Okay. So we had talked about being vulnerable and self-aware. Kind of the lens that you see the world through is based on your own upbringing and culture and experiences, but being aware of that. And then Eve had said treating people how they would like to be treated. That was a big thing, right? Versus how we would like to be treated. So that's about that kind of self-awareness. And the vulnerability was, hey, I don't know what I don't know. And so just sharing that and kind of full transparency in that is something that was really, really helpful, I think, in dealing with diversity and inclusion.
Oh, wonderful. That idea again. Oh, these are just echoing so much. One of the things that Dawn and I did, and we'll maybe talk about this a little bit later, but there's so much to talk about. So I don't know, we were able to put everything in. Back when, after the murder of George Floyd, and especially as the trial was looming, one of the things that we asked employees is, how can management take care of you? And we also understood that management are employees as well. How can you be cared for at this time? And then Dawn asked, as we were coming up with this other program, a senior leader metamorphosis program in anti-racism, asked the questions, what do you want to see from these senior leaders? And vulnerability came up. And that was admit when you don't know something, admit when you're struggling, and that will help us trust you more and make you more human to us. So you don't hear that very often, but we have to be aware of that. Okay, group, thank you, Jen. Group number 4, give us one of your power skills.
Yes, I would say inclusive language, the use of and understanding of.
Absolutely, the inclusive language. Yeah. Now, when you were talking about inclusive language, I came a little bit later. Is that things like using proper pronouns? Is it more than that? What are some thoughts there?
So Vince, that one was mainly concerning just like being self-aware and understanding the group that you're in. And so I like what our other group had shared about is like understanding who's in the room with you and being able to listen to the needs and like experiences of others.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And so pronouns could definitely be in that.
Yes. Thank you for that. And I think that those are very related. And one of the things that we talk about in our course as well is we tend to go to the same people all the time, like our A team or the people that we just feel that we always go to and feel comfortable with. And part of what we're doing is really challenging people to be more inclusive, to be listening to, reaching out to, and delegating to people we wouldn't necessarily go to first off. Because a lot of times what happens is we go to the people who are like us. And so really being inclusive in the language we use, what's coming out, but also kind of what are we asking for voices from? So thank you for that. Thank you, Nick and Aaron, for clarifying. Group 5, give us something.
All right. Well, it's hard to pick one because we came up with 4 just in case somebody took one of ours.
That's why Dawn said do the round robin so we don't have the first 2 groups giving all the good stuff.
Right,
okay,
exactly.
Good call, Dawn.
But I haven't heard any of them yet, which is great.
Okay.
I think I'm going to go with humility. One of our group members, Tim, had just done a LinkedIn DEI course surrounding humility, which I think was really eye-opening the way he kind of described it. And I don't know, he probably doesn't want to talk about it to the group, but it was—
He's too humble. He's too humble.
Yeah, he's too humble. Yes, exactly. So he is, he explained that it was the diversification of groups, the in-group and anybody that's outside of the in-group coming into different scenarios in whatever environment you might be in, work, socially, anything. And just the ability of people that are in the in-group or the group that's, it's like coming into a season 3 of a show and you don't know what's going on, people that are new folks to a group and being able to accept them with open arms and being humble enough to know that they are kind of on the outskirts of the group. I think that's a really important part of DEI.
I love that. I love that. Thank you for that, Allison. And your birthday is, if you wish to share?
Yeah, it's March 8th.
March 8th.
Mhm.
Well, you just had one a couple weeks ago, and that is my wife's birthday.
Oh, you'll never forget it then. Perfect.
Exactly. Exactly, Allison. And Nick, I didn't ask you for your birthday.
May 5th.
May 5th. Boy, we got some Marches and Mays and Octobers so far here. Wow, that's cool. Thank you for that, Allison. Humility, humility. Wonderful. Hey, Molly, why don't you give us another one that your team came up with, unless they've been covered?
Checking the notes. Hold on a second.
Sounds good.
Empathy.
Empathy. Empathy. Why is empathy important?
But
Why is it important? And what does that mean to you, empathy?
to me, it means to make sure that anytime especially if people are going through things, which, you know, happen, to be really understanding and flexible. I think that's a really, I think sometimes I tend to be a little too empathetic and take things on myself. So I don't know where that line should be, but I guess that's just a very personal thing. So there isn't necessarily a should there. Anu or Kara or Jill, if any of you three have any more to add about what we talked about there, feel free to.
You know, one of the things that we teach, and I'm not sure, Dawn, if it's in the Agile Manager per se, but absolutely the ability to understand where someone else is coming from. And you can't understand that unless you are open to the differences that those people bring to their table, understanding to some degree of their background, and you can't assume. We talk about the dimensions of culture, 9 dimensions of culture, and they actually are, and I'm going to say stereotypically, assigned to certain kinds of geographical locations, like Western, European, et cetera, et cetera. And so we do use those so that we can have some language to use, but we always say each person is very, very different. So the best way is to ask them. And we have a tool that they use where they can take those 9 dimensions of culture and talk with their employees and say, here's where I am on this dimension of culture. Where are you? And then you talk about that so that you can really understand where they're coming from. And trust me, they'll share their stories. The other thing I want to say about empathy is this. There's really kind of 2 kinds. Dawn, correct me if I'm wrong. One is understanding and being able to articulate where somebody is coming from and how they might be feeling. The other, Molly, is what you're talking about, is where you're actually feeling it yourself. You know, where you're holding that weight. And as a manager, we can't hold all of that weight of our employees, but we can empathize and understand and articulate. And they are related but different things. And I think the other one we call sympathy. Dawn, did I get that right or did I get that wrong?
You know, I have heard various definitions. I think Brene Brown has a really good take on empathy versus sympathy. And sympathy isn't necessarily understanding or feeling with. It's more, I hear what's going on with you and I regret that it's happening to you. And perhaps an effort to try to make the person feel better. Whereas empathy is feeling with. We have the capacity to do that. We have mirror neurons and literally can feel along with someone because of that capacity in our brains. So that's what I think. And there's a little 5-minute short, just Google Brene Brown empathy, and it's a great little description of the difference between the two.
Yeah. Yeah. And what I found in life, I have adult children, and without going too much on a deep end here, is I remember once my wife she was having a hard time sleeping because she was feeling the pain that my daughter was feeling in a situation. And she said, I kind of hope that because I went through all of this, that my children didn't have to go through it. And it's like, well, yeah, they do. That's unfortunate. But part of it is, how do I show that love, show that care, show that understanding without owning it myself and having it weigh me down? And also without placating, which is, oh, I'm so sorry for you. You know what I mean? And kind of a pity sort of thing. So Brene Brown, wonderful. Thank you for that. Brittany, you got another one to share with us?
Oh, not that I wrote down. So I'll need to phone a friend for the other people on my team to see if there's anything I'm forgetting.
Okay, phone a friend. Anybody in two who would like to add anything else? Don't be humble, although humility is important, as we have just described. Okay, that's all right, no problem. Jen, did you have anything to add to the list here from group 3?
Sorry, rookie mistake. I was double muted.
Don't you? That happens.
So I think this kind of flows into probably a lot of what people are saying, but I think being intentional and acting like like situational leadership was kind of the word that we coined. As far as, getting to know your audience and their background. And I think it kind of comes into being curious was like one of those words too, right? And asking questions, and it's okay not to know everything as a leader.
Which is part of the vulnerability as well, to be able to go to your folks and say, I don't get that. I don't know that. I don't have experience in that. Can somebody help me? That is vulnerable and curious. I like that, being curious. And then the situational leadership, one of the things that we do, we kind of created our own model, being inspired by situational leadership and others, where we look at being more hands-on as a coach and more hands-off as a coach. So we talk about those instances where you need to just kind of guide from behind or ahead, but you don't actually delve in there and do something or correct or kind of do that, put your hands in there. And when are the times you need to be more hands-off, and when do you need to be more hands-on? And then the other thing we do with that is we do then look at the dimensions of culture and say that, some people may prefer that more hands-on and some may prefer the hands-off as well. So really know your people with that and know the situations that you're dealing with. Not only the person, but the situation when you're determining how much you're going to really interact and involve yourself in what it is your employee is doing. So I kind of hear that, as well as that curiosity, that being okay to be not knowledgeable about what's going on. Thank you for that. Nick, another thing that the group came up with?
All of the things that we talked about have been mentioned already.
There you go. Wonderful. Allison, anything that your group might add?
Yeah, I think a couple of them overlap a bit with what Jen had mentioned, but one of our words was inquisitiveness, which I think is very similar to kind of what she described. But one other one that may be slightly variable is the receptiveness. So just an active listening and receptive to any sort of different working styles or any sort of cultural backgrounds when it comes to working styles or to how people show up. Just being receptive to that is really important as a leader.
Absolutely. Receptive to it. And I'm even going to add to that, it's receptive and it's acknowledging. I think a lot of times when people say, I hear it all the time, I want to be heard. I want to be heard. Well, I can hear you, but unless I say, I'm hearing that you'd like to approach that differently. I'm hearing that is challenging, and it's going to be challenging for all of us. It's being receptive and making sure that we're letting people know that we're receiving that. I love it, love it, love it. So anyone else before we move on, Allison, any other ones that you'd want to mention that haven't been mentioned so far?
You know what? No, I'm glad that we had 4 because
There you go.
yep, our 4th was
Because you
empathy.
are high
So
achievers.
yes.
Because Molly, were there any you wanted to add at this point?
I don't think so. I mean, communication was kind of the other one we talked about, but we've had plenty of things that touched on that already in the discussion.
Okay, wonderful. And Jen, was there anything that your group came up with that we haven't talked about yet?
I would, I think they kind of all flow together, interpersonal, knowing how to communicate, but yeah, I think that extends our list too.
Wonderful. And I appreciate that with the communication, we talk a little bit about communication styles, but we have even separate curriculum on that with the Agile Manager, that's one set. There's so many other things that persons can go into, and communicating, different ways to communicating is definitely one of them. Wonderful. Thank you so much. I appreciate that.
Hey,
and
Vince,
then I'm going, go ahead, please.
could you speak more on the 9 dimensions that you referenced earlier?
Yes, absolutely. And so actually, if you go online and you look at dimensions of culture, you're going to find quite a few different models. However, they're very, very similar, but they might have a different TM on them. Okay, so here's one dimension. One is, you've heard this before, more extroversion. One is more introversion. Okay, so that's one of them. One is more direct and more indirect. Okay, so another one is more emotional and more reserved. And the example I give on the emotional and the reserved is, I'm going to use stereotypically a French background and a German background. And so the example that I give is, with my father, I did this play once, and I was Felix, and I came off, I was in high school, and my father gave me this huge hug, and he's crying, and I can't believe you did that, and I'm so proud of you. And my mother, she just looked at me, barely hugged me, and said, I saw you smiling in a couple of scenes. Don't smile, because you're the comedian. Comedians don't smile at their own jokes. And it's really interesting. And then when I go to my father's side of the family, everybody hugs you and kisses you on both cheeks. And my mother's, oh, so are you here today? I didn't know you were coming. And so really, I use that as a stereotypical thing, but the culture that they grew up in, one is more emotional and expressed, and some are more reserved. And then one where I'll just...
Vince,
Yes.
just a slight edit.
Sure.
We say expressive versus reserved because
yes, we
those
do.
are both have emotion. Everyone along the continuum have emotion. It's just that some people contain it and some people express it. And so I would use the word emotion because they all have emotion.
That's good. I said it wrong. Thank you. Now you realize, of course, that Dawn is my manager. And what she did is she knew when to enter in and to correct. And that is an important skill, especially when I'm working with folks and giving a seminar. Thank you, Dawn, for your feedback.
Certainly.
You're absolutely correct. And so there are actually 9 of them. One of the ones that I always struggle with a little bit is inner directed and outer directed. And so there's some cultures, or I like to say some people, who are really, it's what's happening out here that helps them determine how they're going to do and what they're going to do, et cetera, et cetera. And some, it all comes from within, and outer, and even with outer, some of the affirmation is important. And then from an internal, it's kind of like I can own that myself and really be okay and kind of motivate myself. Just very, very interesting. But importantly, having those discussions with your employees. They love them. People love having those discussions. Any other questions?
So we have a follow-up, where do you find cultural dimensions to be helpful, and where do you see it as a potential to reinforce stereotypes?
Oh my gosh, thank you so much. Everywhere. And when you think about, we put the cultural dimensions in the one where we are talking about coaching. So we actually talk about those kind of coaching styles, hands-on and hands-off. And then we talk about the dimensions of culture with that, where we're saying, how would you like to be managed? So that's how we do it. That's where we put it, because you need to put it somewhere. But it really does fit in anywhere. So for example, when you are, here's a great example. In fact, we have these little cards, cultural dimension cards, and you get a scenario and it says, your team just accomplished something, okay? And then you have one of the dimensions and you come in and you say, guess what, team? We did it. You know what I mean? And then the idea is, well, how might you, if you had a group that, might be a little bit more reserved, et cetera, how might you handle it there? And you might come in and say, you know what, I would like to talk about some of our accomplishments over the past couple of weeks. Anyway, so we actually have a whole set of scenarios that help you to say, how would you alter your style if you were dealing with this particular situation in a team or on an individual basis. But it really does fit anywhere. When you're developing somebody, go ahead.
I'd like to add for the part 2 of the question, we always present these continuums. We also do some styles, disc, et cetera. We always present these models with people are delightfully complex, and these models only get to an approximation of the individual. And so it is a starting place, and we try to avoid stereotyping people with these models and these assumptions about their culture and behaviors by encouraging people just to use them as a starting place and then get to know the individual, because you can't wiggle them into these boxes. They are too complex, and these boxes are too simplistic to really capture them. So it's with that kind of grounding that we use them with humility.
Absolutely. Thank you for that, Dawn. Because like I said, if you go online, you're going to see 9 and you're going to see 7, you're going to see 5. We do the strength finders here at the city. There's 34. Does that mean that there's only 34 talent areas for humankind? No. These get you in the ballpark and get the discussions going. So thank you for that. Any other questions or comments? These were excellent questions and I appreciate them. Riding the Waves of Culture by Fons Tempernars. I'm not Trampinars was a great book where I learned more about culture.
Our partner in designing the Agile Manager uses Trampinars as a source for her information that she contributes.
Wonderful.
She's mentioned that name quite often.
Thank you so much for that. Wonderful. Okay, well, let's go on here then. What we're going to talk about now, we're actually right on time. We are going to end our presentation at about 25 after, because Jay will have some other things to talk about. But how did we develop this? Dawn, why don't you get us started?
So we've been talking about content and what we needed to include, and I'm delighted to report that we did choose many of the topics that you have surfaced during these 2 exercises. Course 1, we help people get the sense of what is expected of leaders, and also we ask them to come up, what do they expect of themselves as leaders? They have some idea of what they want to put out there. And so we raise all of those expectations and talk about how people live into them, fulfill them, put their own unique spin on them. Folks in that session are also getting the proceeds from their 180-degree assessments done by both themselves and their bosses. They're setting a couple of learning goals for the series and getting acquainted with one another, which of course is a big highlight of that first course. The second course has got to do with coaching and the skill set of offering coaching, supervisory coaching to your direct reports. And we provide a model called Pride, which is similar to the model you may be familiar with Inside Out Coaching folks, called Grow. We've put our own kind of public sector customization on it and call it Pride, and help people through a couple of sessions to practice that model and also to practice giving coaching in a culturally agile way. When we know some people are expecting coaching, wanting coaching, others are a little reticent from getting that from an authority figure. And all of those differences, all of those assumptions, we want to take those into account as we are offering ourselves as coaches. Course 3 is all about performance management and development. Those fundamental duties of all of us to direct people's performance, to inspire and motivate their performance, to literally give them work. How do you do that in a culturally agile way? How do you delegate well and making those kinds of decisions and choices in order to continue to grow your high-performing team and the individuals that make it up? Course 4 is the one that when we interviewed people, folks told us they needed this one the most. And that's dealing with challenging situations that leaders face, the ones that involve people. So it's about interpersonal conflict. It's about team dynamics that can become dysfunctional and other kinds of difficult situations, and the skills that leaders can use to stay culturally agile and aware as they are facing those difficult kinds of circumstances that all of us, those painful times that all leaders encounter. Course 5 then culminates in a focus on developing others, the ones who report to you. As I was saying to my small group a little earlier, I'm an older learning leader, been around for a long time. And in the 90s, we didn't talk much about developing our teams. It wasn't really in the water yet. And now it is. People are expecting continuous development. They're needing continuous development. And so how do we, as their bosses, encourage that, foster that, and make it part of our environment? And so that's what that course focuses on, again, with a culturally agile lens. All right, we've got a definition. We've actually used several definitions throughout the several years that I've been part of the city. And this is one that comes to us from Common Sense Consulting, who has worked with us on this overarching skill set and mindset over the last few years. So you can see there, it really does have to do with bridging, shifting one's own assumptions about how things go, kind of climbing out of that self-centered, many times culturally, we could call it a white-centered focus, and shifting out of that to acknowledge that there are many, many ways of successfully approaching the work and approaching one another. Mm-hmm. And the shorthand that we use a lot is it's just the ability to show up and work with folks who are very, very different from you, just as well as you do with folks who have a lot in common and very similar to you. So that's that platinum rule I've heard several people mention today, the ability to do unto others the way they prefer that you do unto them. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So that's how we define it, and obviously thread it through all of these 5 courses.
Absolutely.
And then Vince is just going to give us a couple of examples of the common model that we use all the way through and talk to us a little bit about the partnership with the neuroscience of inclusion.
Sure. And Dawn, before I do that, remind me, because I always forget, how did you originally hook up with Shannon and really say, this is the thing that's really going to help us weave this together?
I was asking around. I was a member at the time of HR Connection, if you're familiar with HR Connection, and a few other professional societies, a group of people I get together with that came out of the Minnesota OD network. And I was asking, who do you know out there? Because I don't want just a series of courses and one, add-on course around diversity education and so on and so forth. I want it to be threaded all the way through. Do you know anybody out there who does that? Well, we were already working with Shannon Murphy in a different capacity with her relationship with Janice Downing and Common Sense Consulting. But one of the professional society folks said, "Oh, you want to talk to Shannon Murphy about that?" And I said, "Wait a minute, I already work with Shannon Murphy. Somebody telling me something here." And so that is how we became aware of Shannon's other business, which is called Brain Skills at Work. Shannon is a researcher of neuroscience and had developed a model of helping us work with our brain's tendencies and to get those tendencies in a place that serves us best as leaders. And so Vince, tell us a little bit more and give us a couple of examples.
Sure. So I always like to have my aid. And yes, mine, I don't know, Dawn, if yours is signed by
I think it is.
Okay, good. I just wanted to be sure. And so this is a book. We do not require people to read the book, of course, if they want to, it's helpful to them. But what we really talk about here is the role of the higher brain or the prefrontal cortex in inclusion, anti-racism, and cultural agility. And I'll show you the three brain states in a minute, and then key skill building throughout the session. So what's really cool here is that people take an assessment, a brain states assessment. It is a self-assessment. So in addition to doing the 180, where they and their manager take a look at, the basic management skills that follow the ones that Dawn had mentioned, we ask them to take this assessment where they look at 7 dimensions of being in a higher brain state. And I guess I don't need to go through them all right now, but I'll give a couple examples a little bit later. And then they have a one-on-one coaching there, and then they look at the group results, and then we also meld these things into the program itself. It's really quite fascinating. And so I just think it's really cool. This is the very basic model. And that is that we want, as much as possible, when we are working with our employees, to be in a higher brain state of real ability to be processing information, well, open to inclusion. As you can see here, open perception. So you're able to really see what is happening around me. What am I thinking right now? And thusly higher choices, where you are making choices based upon good, solid reasoning, perceptions, and thought, as opposed to the lower brain state. And we've heard this before, probably, where you're operating more from your fight, flight, or freeze in that lower brain state, where you're being more closed to perception, and really are making choices based upon reaction rather than responding. And we may think, okay, we've heard that, we know all of that, because I heard about that in psychology in college and in my master's program. But it's really interesting to say, where are we really at? And how often are we in that lower state? And so we look at that, and I think I put a couple examples. So one is we do a thing on metacognition, which is when coaching, what are we thinking? What unconscious biases are in front of us that we need to make more conscious so we can deal with it? We have a bunch of lenses of biases that you look through, and you say, okay, am I looking through this lens? Another is brain energy. Is we will be more in the lower brain state, in the middle brain state, if we are tired. And so we actually ask people to do a brain energy log and say, when throughout the day are you at your higher energy? And let's make decisions and tougher thinking happening during those times rather than when we're tired. So those are just a couple of examples of how we use the brain states, but there are many, of course. And then we've just got a few more minutes here to go over what we did with the ADDIE model. Dawn? All
right, I'm just going to quickly run through this, and this is going to sound familiar if you've ever followed ADDIE in order to create a new program. It was just a bit skilled up there for creating a whole series. And so we began by assessing needs. with, the gist of the questions being, what do you wish you had known when you first began supervising other people?
Mhm.
We designed and developed each program in partnership. Essentially, we each chose our topic or topics. We knew we wanted to have 5 courses. I took 2. Vince, I think you've got 2. And then the other person on our team took 1. And Shannon worked with us throughout, which helped with continuity. And lots of interaction. We all did this very collaboratively. It was a very fun design development process.
It was the most fun I've had, and I've developed programs before.
I don't seem to be able to advance the slides.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I wanted to mention a few features that we built in past just having 5 modules. And by the way, during COVID, we broke those modules into 2 to 3 sessions each. They were originally designed to be 1 full day. I had it in my head that I didn't want to make people sit in front of a screen for 8 hours. And so we broke them into 2 to 2.5 hour sessions. Each module has 2 to 3. You begin with the 180 assessment with your boss. We spaced the modules with in between assignments. And so folks had about 2 weeks to get something accomplished, to plug in some piece of the learning with some of their work. After each of the courses or modules, we do a quick content update to the bosses of the participants. So here's what we talked about. Here's what you can talk with your direct report in terms of what they're learning. And then Vince told us about the brain states assessment and the coaching session that we also added. And so implementing and evaluating, we designed both a level 1 evaluation. Did you like the program? And did it meet your expectations? And also a level 3 survey that goes out about 6 weeks post with questions on, did you apply to the job? Did this show up in a changed way in terms of your behaviors as a boss? Next slide. These are fairly early results because we've just finished our 5th cohort and are currently in our 6th, but we continue to experience full enrollment, people knocking at the door on a waiting list, lots of positive buzz, and then preliminarily positive employee results with the surveys that we do post-program, and also with our engagement survey that we do in general in the organization. Where do we go next? What we plan to do after this frontline leadership development series was to design and facilitate a leadership development series for our senior leaders, the top leaders in the city. And that's currently underway. We call that program Metamorphosis. And you can see that it is focused on becoming an anti-racist leader. And so it really does take more of a step in that direction than the Agile Manager has to date. That could certainly be changing as we walk this path. All right, I think that's our conclusion. And I think we just sailed in perhaps at time, maybe a couple of minutes for questions.
And there are a couple of comments there as well, folks, with some other resources.
We've got only a couple minutes left. We do want to say thank you. Can you answer Jordan's question before you go? What do you do in advance of these programs to make sure your participants are fully bought in and give you their attention?
Well, first of all, it is a voluntary program. It is not required. The city doesn't require much in terms of learning and development, thinking that we really want people to volunteer. We want to attract people rather than them feeling that they have to go. And so it's always their choice and their decision. We provide them quite a bit of literature. And this is what you're getting yourself into. Here are the commitments to participate. And then the 180-degree assessment occurs before the classes ever begin, so that people are assessing themselves and knowing that their boss is also assessing them on the core leadership focuses that we are going to look at during the Agile Manager. So that helps, I think, prime their brains for what is going to be going on.
Wonderful. Hey, Don and Vince, thank you so much. Thanks all of you for spending your morning with us. Please take a minute or two to say thank you to Don and Vince. Come off mute or chat or do your reaction with the hand clap or the celebration. Just very important work that you guys did. So thank you for that. And thank you for taking the time to share it with us today. And you didn't let us down. Always fun when the two of you present together. So thank you very much.
Well, it certainly was our pleasure.
Thank you, everyone. Hope to see
And-
some of you. Oh, go ahead, Vince.
And thank you, Luke, for your technical help. It is such a blessing to have a technical person helping, is it not? Anyone who's ever done virtual learning. This is fabulous, and it's the way it's supposed to be done, and you did great.
Yes, you
You're
did.
very welcome, and thank you.
Hey, thanks, everyone. Enjoy your day. Hope to see some of you at our Thought Leader series on April 4th. Timeless Rules of Great Learning, Terrence Donahue.
Wonderful. Take care. Sounds fascinating. Take care, folks.